In many of the older neighborhoods of Japan, houses sit close together, drainage runs beneath narrow streets, and rats have had centuries to learn every trick a city offers them. And yet you will find homes in these neighborhoods that stay rat-free year after year, while the house 2 doors down fights the same losing battle every winter. The difference is not luck. It is not a secret chemical. It is a way of thinking about the problem that most people never learn, because the pest control industry does not make money teaching you how to need it less. I want to start with something true about Japanese culture that has nothing to do with rats at first. In Japanese schools, children clean their own classrooms. There are no janitors coming through after the bell. Students sweep the floors, wipe the windows, and take turns with the trash every single day from the time they are small. This is called soji, a word that means cleaning, but carries more weight than that translation suggests. It is the idea that maintaining an environment is not a chore you hire someone else to do. It is a daily discipline that prevents problems before they start. That habit follows people into adulthood, and it shapes the way many Japanese households think about pests, mold, and decay, not as emergencies to be fought, but as failures of maintenance to be avoided. This matters for rats more than almost anything else I could tell you, because of one idea that changes everything once you actually absorb it. You do not have a rat-killing problem. You have a rat invitation problem. Every rat that gets into a home was invited, not on purpose, but through a gap in the foundation nobody sealed, a bag of pet food left open overnight, a garbage can with a lid that does not quite close, a compost pile that smells like dinner to anything with a nose. The commercial pest control industry sells you the killing part: poison, bait boxes, service contracts, someone in a uniform who comes back every quarter. What it rarely sells you, because there is no recurring revenue in it, is the plain truth that if you close the invitations, you mostly do not need the killing at all. I should also say something about why I am not simply telling you to buy poison and be done with it, because that is the fastest answer, and it is also the one I think does the least good. Commercial rodenticide, the anticoagulant block sold under a dozen brand names at any hardware store, does work in the narrow sense that a rat which eats enough of it will eventually die. But it takes days to act, during which a poisoned rat keeps moving through your walls and your yard, and it can just as easily be eaten by a hawk, an owl, a neighborhood cat, or a dog, all of which can be poisoned in turn by eating a dying rat. This is called secondary poisoning, and wildlife agencies have documented it in birds of prey for years. It also does nothing at all about the open gap in your foundation that let the rat in to begin with, which means you are back at the store buying more of it next season, and the season after that. None of this makes poison evil. It makes it a treatment for a symptom, sold to you as if it were a cure for the disease. I want to give you the cure instead, or as close to one as this problem actually allows. So tonight I am going to walk you through 3 things: sealing the entry points so nothing new can get in, removing the food and water that keeps rats coming back once they are gone, and a way of setting traps that most people get backwards, which is the actual reason their traps sit untouched for weeks. Along the way, I am also going to tell you about a few tricks you may have seen elsewhere online: the baking soda, the powders, the swelling food, and I am going to tell you plainly why they do not work the way people claim, because wasting your time on something that feels clever but does nothing is worse than doing nothing at all. Let us start with sealing, because nothing else matters until this is done first. Take a flashlight and walk the entire outside perimeter of your home. Get down low. Check where pipes enter the foundation, where wiring comes through the wall, where the dryer vent meets the siding, where the garage door meets the concrete. You are looking for anything a pencil could slide into, because that is roughly the size of gap an adult rat needs. Their bodies do not have a rigid collarbone the way ours do, so once the head fits through an opening, the rest of the body compresses and follows. A gap around ½ an inch wide, sometimes even a little smaller for a young rat, is enough. It sounds impossible until you have watched it happen once. After that, you will never look at a gap the same way again. For every opening you find, the real material is steel wool, the coarse kind sold in hardware stores for stripping paint and polishing metal, not the soap-filled kind meant for dishes. It costs about $7 for a roll at a hardware store, and one roll is more than enough for a typical house. Steel wool works because rats cannot gnaw through it. Their front teeth never stop growing, and they can chew through wood, drywall, soft plastic, and even some concrete over time, but the tangled steel fibers cut their mouths and they give up. Pack the wool in tight, filling the gap completely, no loose ends hanging out for them to pull at. Then seal over the top with caulk. A tube runs about $6, so the steel wool stays locked in place and the whole repair looks finished instead of makeshift. For larger openings, like a vent or a hole where a pipe used to run, use a piece of heavy metal mesh screwed into place rather than wool alone, since wool packed into a big gap can eventually be pushed loose. Do this walk at 2 different times, once during the day and once after dark with a flashlight, because gaps that are easy to miss in daylight often show themselves clearly when you are looking for a source of draft or a shift in shadow along a foundation line. Pay particular attention to the corners of your house where the foundation meets the framing, and to any place where 2 different materials meet, brick against wood siding, concrete against a garage door frame, because these seams shift slightly with the seasons and rarely get resealed by whoever built the house. Check your attic vents and your crawlspace vents as carefully as you check the ground floor. Rats climb far better than most people expect, using downspouts, tree branches that touch the roofline, and even rough brick or stucco texture to reach openings well above eye level. A gap under the eaves that nobody has looked at in a decade is often the actual point of entry, even when the droppings you find are in the kitchen. Do this for every single gap you find, not just the ones that look obvious. Rats are patient in a way most pests are not. They will return to the same wall for weeks, testing the same few inches because their whiskers have already mapped it as a possible way in. One missed gap undoes the sealing you did everywhere else. This is the part of the job that takes the longest, not because it is difficult, but because it asks for the same kind of unglamorous thoroughness that soji asks of a child sweeping a classroom floor. You are not looking for the obvious hole. You are looking for the one you would rather not have noticed. The full job, steel wool plus a couple tubes of caulk plus a mesh patch for a vent, runs most homes somewhere between $25 and $40 total, done once, lasting years unless something physically damages the seal. That is the real cost. Not free, because pretending it is free insults your intelligence, but a fraction of what a single visit from an exterminator costs, and it does not need repeating every season the way bait boxes do. One thing worth being honest about, sealing a house completely on the first attempt rarely happens. Even a careful walk with a flashlight misses something the first time, usually a gap hidden behind a shrub or under a deck that never quite gets checked properly until droppings show up nearby a second time. This is not a failure on your part. It is simply the nature of a foundation that has had decades to develop small cracks and settle unevenly. Treat the first walk as the major pass, and treat the weekly and seasonal checks I will describe later as the way you catch what the first pass missed, rather than expecting one afternoon with a flashlight to finish the job permanently. Once the house is sealed, the second piece is removing the reasons a rat would want to be there in the first place, even briefly, even passing through your yard. Store pantry food, especially anything in a paper bag or cardboard box, in containers with a tight lid, glass or heavy plastic. It does not matter which as long as the seal is real. Rats can smell food through cardboard and thin plastic bags easily. Take the kitchen garbage out every night rather than letting it sit, and make sure the outdoor bin has a lid that actually latches, not just rests on top. If you feed a pet outside or even inside near a door, do not leave the bowl out overnight. A rat does not need much to justify a nightly visit, and once a visit becomes a habit, that is when a single curious animal turns into a nest. Water matters just as much as food, and people forget this constantly. A dripping outdoor faucet, a pet's water bowl left outside, a low spot where rain collects near the foundation, all of these are as attractive to a rat as a food source. A rat can survive for a fair while without eating, but it needs water far more often, and a reliable puddle near your back step can be enough of a reason for one to stay in your yard, even before it ever tries the house itself. If you have a leak you have been meaning to fix, this is one more reason to actually fix it. Outside the house, look at your yard the same way you looked at your foundation. Firewood stacked directly against the siding gives rats both a hiding place and a bridge up toward the roofline, so raise it off the ground and keep it a short distance from the wall. A dense hedge or overgrown shrub planted right against the house does the same thing, giving cover for a rat to sit and study your foundation for the one gap you missed. If you keep a compost pile, keep it in a container with a secured lid rather than an open heap, and avoid putting meat, dairy, or oily food scraps into it at all, since these draw rodents far more strongly than vegetable trimmings do. Bird feeders are worth mentioning too. The seed that falls to the ground beneath one is a reliable food source that many homeowners never think to associate with a rat problem, simply because the feeder was meant for something else entirely. None of this is glamorous. There is no clever trick here, just the plain discipline of soji applied to your own home instead of a classroom floor. But it is the difference between a house rat's pass by and a house rat settle into, and no trap or poison changes that equation on its own. Now, for the rats that are already inside, or the ones that get in before your sealing work is finished, here is where most people fail, and here is the actual fix, which has nothing to do with a fancier bait and everything to do with patience. Rats are what biologists call neophobic, meaning they carry a deep, built-in suspicion of anything new that appears in their environment. A trap you set out today, baited and armed on the very first night, will almost always be ignored by an adult rat, or worse, it will graze the animal without killing it, and that rat will now avoid every trap you ever set for the rest of its life. This single mistake, setting the trap too soon, is the reason so many people give up on trapping and go straight to poison, when the trap itself was never the problem. The fix, used by professional pest technicians and recommended plainly by health authorities, is to place the trap exactly where you want it, baited with something like peanut butter, but leave the mechanism unset for several days, sometimes up to a week. Let the rat find it. Let it eat from the trap night after night with no danger attached. You are teaching the animal, through repetition, that this object is safe. Only once you notice the bait is reliably being taken, night after night, do you arm the trigger. The next time that same rat approaches expecting an easy meal, the trap does its job instantly. Placement matters as much as timing. Rats travel along walls, not across open floor, because moving along a vertical surface keeps them protected from predators above and lets them navigate with their whiskers in the dark. Set the trap so the trigger end sits against the baseboard, perpendicular to the wall, forming something like the letter T. This forces the animal to cross directly over the trigger as it follows its usual path, rather than requiring it to walk out into open space to reach the bait. A trap sitting in the middle of a room, however well baited, will simply be ignored because no rat with any sense walks across exposed floor if it can avoid it. Use more than one trap if the problem is more than a single animal. A handful of traps, 6 to 12 for a real infestation, placed along every wall where you have seen droppings or gnaw marks. Costs perhaps $15 to $25 total for the traps themselves, and outperforms a single expensive bait station by a wide margin because you are working with the animal's own caution instead of hoping it ignores it. There's a second piece of patience worth understanding here, which is that rats also carry human scent for longer than most people assume, so it helps to wear gloves when you handle a trap. Not because a rat can smell your hand and read it as danger from across a room, but because a strong new scent on an object is one more unfamiliar detail for an already cautious animal to notice. It costs you nothing to wear a pair of dish gloves while you set the trap, and it removes one more reason for the animal to hesitate. Do not move a trap every day looking for a better spot, even though this feels productive. Moving it resets whatever trust the rat has built with that particular location, and you end up back at the start of the pre-baiting period without realizing it. If a trap has gone untouched after 4 or 5 days in a spot where you were confident you saw activity, that is useful information, not a failure. It tells you the animal's actual path runs somewhere else, close by but not exactly where you guessed, and you should shift the trap a short distance rather than abandoning the approach entirely. Check your traps each morning, both to see what has happened overnight and to replace bait that has dried out or gone stale, since a rat is no more interested in old hardened peanut butter than you would be. Now let me address directly the tricks I mentioned at the start, because you may well have come across them, and I would rather tell you plainly why they fall short than let you waste a week trying something that was never going to work. You may have seen advice about mixing baking soda with sugar and flour, the idea being that rats cannot burp or vomit, so the gas produced when baking soda meets stomach acid supposedly builds up and kills them. It is a story that sounds scientific, and it spreads easily online because it is cheap and clever sounding, but there is no real evidence it reliably kills anything. The chemistry is not wrong in a jar on your counter, but a rat's stomach does not behave like an open reaction vessel, and the amount an animal would need to eat, disguised or not, to produce a fatal effect is not something you can count on delivering through a shallow dish of powder. The same goes for plaster of Paris mixed into bait, and for dry instant potato flakes meant to expand once the animal drinks water. Both ideas circulate widely, both sound plausible, and neither has the kind of reliable track record that sealing, sanitation, and a properly timed trap actually have. If you spend 2 weeks refilling little dishes of powder while the real entry point in your foundation stays open, you have lost 2 weeks, and the rat has not. I bring this up not to lecture you, but because this is exactly the trap, no pun intended, that the internet sets for people looking for a free, clever fix. A trick that sounds like insider knowledge is not the same thing as a trick that works. The old ways that actually hold up, sealing a gap with steel wool, taking the garbage out at night, letting a trap earn a rat's trust before you arm it, are not exciting to read about. They are just true. There is a pattern to why these particular myths keep spreading, and I think it is worth naming because it will help you recognize the next one before you waste a week on it. Each of these tricks describes something that sounds biologically plausible if you do not look closely, uses an ingredient you already own, and requires no visible effort beyond mixing a bowl and walking away. That combination, a plausible mechanism plus zero cost plus zero labor, is exactly what makes a claim spread online, whether or not anyone has actually tested it. Real pest control, the kind that works, asks something harder of you. It asks you to spend an afternoon on your knees with a flashlight and to wait patiently for several days before a trap is even armed. That is a much less shareable story, even though it is the one that actually solves the problem. One more tool worth mentioning honestly because you will hear about it constantly: peppermint oil. Rats do rely heavily on smell, and a strong concentration of peppermint oil can make them avoid a specific spot for a little while. Soaked cotton balls placed under a sink or near a suspected gap are cheap. A small bottle runs a few dollars and they are not going to hurt anything. But be honest with yourself about what this is. It is a short-term irritant, not a barrier. The scent fades within a few days and needs constant replacing, and any rat with an actual reason to be in your home, a food source, a warm space to nest, will tolerate an unpleasant smell to get to it. Use it as a small supplement near an area you have already sealed, not as a substitute for sealing it. Once the sealing is done, the food sources are locked down, and any remaining rats have been dealt with through properly timed traps. The last part of this is simply upkeep, because a house does not stay sealed forever on its own. Once a week, walk through your kitchen and check behind the stove and refrigerator for crumbs and grease that build up where you cannot easily see. Look under sinks for any sign of moisture or gnawing. Check your pantry to be sure nothing has been left in a bag instead of a sealed container. Take a moment to glance along your baseboards for any new droppings, which tell you immediately if something has found its way back in. Once each season, repeat the full exterior walk you did at the start. Weather causes houses to shift and settle. Caulk can crack, and steel wool can loosen slightly over months of temperature changes. A seal that was solid in spring is worth checking again by fall. Rats are endlessly patient animals, and a single new gap the width of a pencil is all it takes to undo months of otherwise good work. Keep a small note, even something as simple as a date written on your calendar, of when you last walked the perimeter, because it is easy to convince yourself that a job you did once is a job that is finished forever, and a house is never quite finished in that way. If you have pets, build this same seasonal habit around checking whatever bait or trap you have placed, and never place snap traps in any area a curious dog or cat can reach without protecting them inside a covered box with small entry holes cut for a rat but not for anything larger. This costs almost nothing to build from a scrap of wood or a length of plastic pipe. And it removes the one real safety concern that comes with trapping instead of poisoning. This is the real shape of the Japanese approach to a problem like this, and it is less a set of tricks than it is a habit of mind. You do not fight rats. You remove every reason for them to consider your home in the first place, and you make the few that try patient enough to trust a trap before that trap does its work. It costs some real money, a roll of steel wool, a few tubes of caulk, a dozen traps, somewhere in the range of $40 to $60 total for most homes, spent once and rarely needed again. It is not free, and I will not tell you otherwise. But it is honest, it is cheap compared to a service contract that never ends, and unlike the powders and the online tricks, it is built on things you can actually verify are true. I think that is really the whole lesson underneath all of this, more than any single trick I have described tonight. A home that keeps rats out is not a home that won a war against them. It is a home where nothing was ever left open for them to find, checked, and rechecked with the same quiet discipline a child learns sweeping a classroom floor, long before the war would have needed to start at all.